Who do you support in the Premier League, Tom?
Well, that's a good question. I don't really have an out-and-out team.
Mm.
I'd more at times support people that I might have I might know that's been involved with the game, but there's less and less of them now because everybody's getting older. I've got a soft spot for Palace,
Crystal Palace,
and there's two reasons for that. I always remember them in the 70s. A guy called Don Rogers, who was a really won goal of the year one year, but they were always this club that yo-yoed between. It was the first division, and first division, second division, sometimes the third division, and they would come up and they would get good cup runs and all that kind of stuff. But I watched a documentary. I don't know if you watched the doc.
Which one?
So I think it was called Flying with the Eagles.
No, I haven't seen that one.
Really good. You know how you demand City won and the
The all or nothing one. Yeah.
Well, there's the Crystal Palace one was really good.
Yeah.
Because they almost went bankrupt.
Yeah.
And 4 local businessmen ended up buying. Cut long story short, ended up buying them, and they've kind of kept to the tradition of the area and the club and the community. Yeah. And that kind of appealed to me.
I think so. Back then, they were basically everyone's second favourite club. Yeah. So. Fair enough.
That's like me. I was Chelsea, but I've got a soft spot for Brentford. I don't know why. Okay. I love Thomas Frank as a manager.
Yeah.
He sort of manages very similar to the way I like to.
They've done amazing. I mean, they were a 4th division club.
Yep.
Not that many years ago.
For me, it's a love-hate relationship with Sean Dyche.
Oh God! All right, Jules, ready to go? All right.
Sunderland, Sunderland till I die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a doco.
That was a great doc. They were great, and that was like those ones. So I didn't like the Man City one because it was too slick. Yeah. It was like they never saw. You saw what you wanted them, what they wanted you to see.
Not one bad moment.
Yeah. And whereas Sunderland was like,
cracker doco.
Yeah, and then
ready. Beautiful.
Even the Arsenal one was good. I think it was a very interesting season.
Arsenal was
a few moments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, give us the 5. Give us 5 and we'll go from there.
One, count us down, mate.
All right, beautiful. Webs, kick us off.
From a coaching career that started all the way back in 1988 at Canberra, Croatia, to coaching our national women's team, New Zealand, US and Canada, playing a massive role in the introduction of the Orlando Pride into the NWSL and building a foundation that led to their maiden title in 2024, or whether it was the countless international trophies, including the one major Matildas honour in 2010, the Asian Cup, and most recently leading the next generation of development as the head of women's football at the Wanderers. And our guest today is none other than Mr. Tom Sermanni. How are you, Tom?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Mate, it's an honour.
Thanks, Abs. I'm here as well.
Oh, you're not the important Thomas today?
No, I'm joking. Today I'll gladly accept being the second Tom. Tom, mate, give us a bit about it yourself. And obviously Abs has a lovely set of paragraph and a half about you. But just give us a basic, being of Scottish heritage and stuff like that, how did you sort of become interested in coming to Australia and obviously your side in women's football?
Oh, it's good. Well, I think like anything, when you're brought up in Glasgow in the era that I was brought up, which was a very working class blue collar city, you basically went out, played football in the streets and hoped that you would become a footballer at some stage. That was your general aim in those days, and sort of managed to muddle a career out of the game. And interestingly, when I was sort of getting towards the sort of latter years of my career, I got an offer from a guy called Doug Collins, who was coaching at Marconi, and Doug had known me from playing in England, and his assistant coach Mike Hickman was the assistant coach at one of the clubs I played for in England. So I got an offer from Doug and from Hickey to come across to Marconi. I really only intended coming out here for a season or two, and here I am 40 years later.
No, well, it's fair. I mean, congratulations on the recent win as well. 2-1 over Germany.
Thank you. It was. It's always good to get a win.
And it's your third stint, you told us before. So you think from up to 97, and then you took the Asian Cup in 2010, and then before you moved on to the US national team, correct?
Yep.
And we're on our third stint now. So how are we feeling 3 stints in?
And the third stint, it's funny. I feel probably a little bit different, and I think part of that is because I'm at a very different stage of my career. Whereas, my first 2 stints with the Matildas, I was still, if you like, building a career. I'm now at the stage where I'm at the end of a career. So in some ways, the pressures and the ambition that you had in the other parts of my coaching life with the Matildas is a little bit different now. And although I've gone into the job exactly to do the same thing as I would do had I be taking over the job permanently, I've still got my main aim is to stabilise the team, get it back on track, and then hopefully when my tenure finishes, to be able to hand it over in a good state to whoever else is coming in next.
And it's very telling as well, because you've coached the Australian national women's team through about 3 very different eras. The first stint was obviously before women's football generally was, if you get taken off, it was like it wasn't there, it wasn't existent to a lot of people. And then you took them to their only honour at the moment, 2010, whereas now it's kind of past that blown up one, and the Tilly's almost bigger, if not bigger than the Socceroos at this point.
They certainly, I think they are, from a country profile perspective, very much. They're probably the highest profile team in the country, to be honest, of any sport. So they've come a huge way. And my sort of times with the Matildas have been very, very fortunate, in the sense when I first took them was when 2 things happened. Basically, women's football had become an Olympic sport, and Sydney had been given the Olympic Games. So sort of overnight, the women's football became eligible for government funding, which was about $1 million. So I was fortunate to go in right at the start of setting the programme up, and setting all the things in place to take the game to start, if you like, what is the modern day Matildas. So I was fortunate. The second time I came in, I don't know if this was fortunate or not, but within about 6 months we moved into Asia. So that was a game changer. The downside of that was that at that time the Asian countries, particularly China, was still a real powerhouse, and North Korea and Japan were exceptionally good countries, and we were still building at that stage. So the pressure to qualify for World Cups, etc., was very different and much harder. But from a programme perspective, it was fantastic, because we had to actually put things in place to be able to compete with the best countries in the world.
Yeah, instead of playing against Vanuatu and Fiji and Papua New Guinea, you ended up having to play China and Japan and the Koreas of the world.
And travel into the back end of China and to Vietnam and to Myanmar, etc., and play games in very different conditions, very different style of football, different weather, coping food, all those things that the players hadn't really had to cope with before. So it was a huge change. And when people talk to me about that, the generation of players that came through, the Sam Kerrs, Caitlin Fords, Steph Catleys, etc., that's where they learned a trade as young players, because they were travelling as part of our under-20 team, part of our under-17 team in many cases, and also sometimes with the senior team. So they really get their real grounding in football by going in and playing against very tough Asian countries.
That would have been absolutely fundamental. That would have been absolutely fundamental in terms of setting that up from day dot, as soon as they come out of, maybe, whether it's the AIS, whether it's from a club, whether it's from their state representatives. That would have been fundamental.
Yeah.
Setting their careers, stabilising their careers. What I want to go on to, Tom, is obviously Abs alluded to it earlier, 2-1 over Germany. That's an amazing result, first time in 19 years. But obviously under the previous coach, Tony Gustavsson, he sort of employed a 4-2-3-1 at times, or a 4-4-2 mainly, in order, came under a lot of criticism defensively. And we saw in that game he implemented a 5-3-2. Was that to sort of stabilise that defence?
It was primarily to do that, because if you looked, statistically, our our record against the top 10 teams in the world. Goal difference wise, it's not great when you looked at it. So it was really important from a team perspective, first and foremost, to make us difficult to beat. Also, the Germany, in our videos that we'd seen of them, sort of set up in a 4-4-2. So, you know, it was important for us to make sure that we had 3 centre backs to be able to deal with their 2 strikers. So fundamentally, we sort of set that system up to deal with how Germany were going to play.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think even in that back three, I feel like you get the best out of what they call Alana Kennedy at the back, because I do think on the ball she's actually very underrated. I think she's actually able to pass.
Exceptional player on the ball.
Yeah. And especially when you've got, I think Polkinghome is she's aging as well. So we're kind of looking now at a stage where, you know, maybe blooding in a new young centre back is the way to go very soon. I think that back five, yeah, it's going to allow us stability at the back. But I think going forward, when you have a player like Ellie Carpenter on the right, she is, when I say, I think the standard bearer when it comes to fullbacks in women's football. Her ability to go up the field and come back, and go up the field and come back. And then I was in like a Matildas lair, if you want to call it, on TikTok last night. And there were just clips of, you know, some of the times where we've just one-touch football, and it's just Ellie Carpenter running right and behind, playing the perfect ball across goal, and Sam Kerr was onto it 9 times out of 10. So I think that 5-3-2, I think, like Tom said, it's just going to work wonders. But my question is, you've got a few youngsters in the team. You've got Kyra Cooney-Cross, you've got Mary Fowler. How are you going to deal with managing, you know, getting them out of that stardom? You know, they've come in young, they've hit, you know, the shining lights very, very early on. How do you deal with that going forward?
Well, you just deal with it. There's no sort of set playbook to deal with it, because it depends on those individual players themselves, and those, you know, often you've got all sorts of different characters in the team, and quite often in a football team, the personalities on the field that look the most calm, composed and confident are quite often off the field the opposite. They're very different sort of personalities, and sometimes are not a lot of belief in themselves. So when you're dealing with players at any level, to be honest, you're dealing with 11 different individuals, and how you deal with them depends on that individual, and it depends on your relationship with them.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong.
Yeah.
And it's about that. So, as I say, there's no one way. You know, you don't walk in a dressing room and say, right, I'm going to deal with this in one way.
Yeah.
Well, you actually, sometimes you do as a young coach, you think, this is how I'm going to do it. Yep. And then you find out very quickly that, oh, that doesn't actually quite work. So it's about a lot of it, you know. Probably the key thing in coaching is the actual management side, and that's dealing with the ability to get the best out of each of the individual players that you coach.
Absolutely, on that point, I think understanding the squad that you've selected, understanding the players, I think is fundamental to that. The point I wanted to raise was Daniela Gallic. She obviously got her first call-up, come from Melbourne City, and now in the Netherlands. What is sort of your way, and as you said, there's no real playbook, but obviously being around Daniela, how do you feel that, how are you going to blood her into that squad?
Well, firstly, she was very lucky to get in the squad, because she turned down West Sydney Wanderers to go to Melbourne City. So
we're clipping that.
So I told her she's actually very lucky that I picked her for the national team, because I was going to ostracise her, but I didn't do that. Look, she's always been somebody that we've seen as a very special talent. Generally, my key messages to young players is, when they go on the field, is that once you cross that white line, you're not that 16-year-old making a debut. You're a full international player, and you've just got to go in with that confidence and that belief, and play like you're part of the team and that you deserve to be there. So again, that's part of the coach's job, to make sure that you give that player that confidence to do it. In some cases, you don't really need to do it with players. You know, like a Caitlin Ford walked in the team at 16, Emily Van Egmond at 15 or 16, Sam at 15 or 16. And you didn't really have to say anything to them. They just walked in and played. Some others, you know, are a bit less confident than that, and you need to just kind of just reassure them at times. But I think the key thing, and the thing when you're dealing with players, particularly, well, any players, but young players, is to stress to them is that as soon as they're in the national team squad, they're a national team player. They're not just this 16-year-old that we've brought along just to make up the numbers.
That's correct.
And then they've got to go out and prove that on the field.
Yeah, which I was going to say as well, when you've got players like Michelle Heyman, Sian Fryer, and Chloe Lincoln, they play in the A-League. They play in the A-League Women's here. My thing is, how important do you think it is to the girls watching the game, the young boys watching the game, to see that they can go and watch these guys on the weekend close to home and still be able to reach that far up to play for the Matildas? Because I think a lot of our squad, by those 3 players, all play overseas.
Yeah.
So how important is it to have those players in the squad?
No, it's important to have the players in the squad, but it's also important to note that all those other players in the squad virtually started in the A-League Women. So the A-League Women, which I still call the W League, but that's another story. There's has been critical. If we didn't have the A-League, we would be in a terrible state at the moment. So that it's been critical for the development of our players. And then, like anything, and what's happening now is, sorry, I'm rambling again. Is it like the A-League is kind of gone, A-League Women has kind of gone in the direction that I hoped it would have gone when we started it. And that is we started it for a few reasons. But we wanted it developed into a sort of fully professional league, and it's kind of getting there. And then what it's done is it's helped a lot of our players to develop and then go overseas and to further their career overseas. Now what we're seeing is that continuation of that, but we're now starting to see some players come back from overseas and play their careers out in the league, and that's equally important. So that our league is an important league in the sense of giving the players the first stage of their development to then hopefully go on and be full-time professionals.
Well, then that raises the question that I had. Do you think this league could ever be a league where superstars come over, or are we stuck being, I know financially there's restrictions, but do you think we could ever reach that again?
Well, we did have some superstars over here.
Yeah.
Megan Rapinoe played, and certain other players have
I think
played in it.
Rose Lavelle was here for a bit a few years ago. Yeah.
So we've had that. I don't think that's likely to happen again because women's leagues have, developed significantly overseas, and we can't really compete with them. We don't have the resources. We don't have the finances. We've got other, challenges, distance and cost, etc. that the other countries, particularly European countries, don't have. But that doesn't stop us making our league the best league that we can make it.
Yeah.
And our league is a success if we keep producing players who then become full-time professionals overseas and who then go on to make our national team successful. So that's a successful league. I think we get caught up in how can our Australian league compete with the NWSL? It can't.
Yeah.
the NWSL now are multi-million-dollar clubs. We can't compete. What we've got to do is make our clubs the best we can make them to develop our players to the very best that we can develop them.
Yeah.
And then part of that development is getting them to a certain level. Then the reality is most of them, not necessarily all of them, but most of them then going overseas to then go on to bigger, better things and then hopefully come back to the league.
Yeah.
And that's successful for me.
Exactly on that point. And for me, before we move on from a national team setting, Samantha Kerr obviously injured at this stage. From coming second in the Ballon d'Or race, starting her career at Perth, where does she rank amongst the most influential players of football? Most influential footballers in Australia?
Of all time.
Oh, in the world, in women's football, not just Australia. I mean, she is the best known player in Australia now, male or female, without a doubt. I mean, if you went out and asked somebody to name a male or female player, I could probably guarantee you that 90% of those people would say Sam Kerr or one of the other Matildas. And that's where she is at. I mean, she's, from just a girl in Perth is now gone on to, go to a royal wedding and stuff like that. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And her reach and her, if you like, fame is just phenomenal.
I just wanted to point out as well, like, before we move on to, you know, the participation side, it's just crazy how far women's football has come, in the sense of, we went to Melbourne and I ran into Kim Little while we were in Melbourne. I was smiling for the rest of it. I was happy to go home
biggest
after that.
fanboy moment I've ever seen in my life.
Like, it's just crazy how, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, I didn't know too much about women's football. You start to know slowly but surely. You know, I'm an Arsenal fan. I'm a big Arsenal fan. So you start to catch on.
They've got stuff for you. They've got tablets to give you for that.
With the for being an Arsenal fan. But you know, you slowly but you got me there. Slowly but surely, you get to, you know, Vivian Miedema for me. Then you got Beth Mead. For me, my favorite women's player of all time is Leah Williamson. Like, for me, she's the epitome of proper leadership. You know, you see on the social media side a bit of personality, but also she's a great footballer. It's just crazy for me how, you know, 6'6", you know, 140 kilo guy sitting there fanboying over over Kim Little. I wouldn't have never thought that 5 years ago, but no, it's just it's crazy to see.
It's the fame of the stage, and
at least you picked the Scottish, so that's good.
Hey, I've got a soft spot for the Scots. Don't worry, Tom. But
Celtic man, of course, yourself. Correct.
Oh, I am. You know, the man up there, Kieran Tierney, for me is.
Tom, if we just want to clarify to our fans, Celtic or Rangers?
I'm a Celtic.
There we go.
Celtic.
Good answer. Correct. Sorry, guys, don't come for us in the comments.
Ange Postecoglou moved on to Tottenham. That's where I draw the
relax,
line.
mate.
Yeah.
Participation in New South Wales. I think that's a key topic, especially for us being in New South Wales. After that 2023 World Cup, obviously we unearthed some stars, some absolute stars. Mary Fowler really made a case for herself and her name. How important of a milestone do you think that is in 15 to 20 years, Tom?
I don't know about, you know, it's probably the two greatest overused words in sport are culture and legacy, and I'm never quite sure what the impact will be in 15 or 20 years' time. I think there's an immediate impact in the sense of the World Cup was just a phenomenon here. Like, nobody could have believed how big it was going to be. Is obviously there's a spike after that with young girls playing football and the recognition of the Matildas, etc. The legacy and the effect of that, I think, is dependent on what football does with it. You know, quite often what happens is that, a bit like the Olympics, you know, the circus is in town for 3 or 4 weeks and then it leaves town and everybody goes back to normal. So, you know, I think the key thing, you know, for our sport would be to, you know, if they could have or they have leveraged on that World Cup to get more government funding, to get more fields, to get more facilities, to make the game cheaper for players. You know, for me, those are all what I would call practical legacies, rather than just people throwing a word out there of what's the legacy. A memory that's happened and it was really nice at the time.
And if I remember correctly, I do believe the government put some money aside for women's sports in general after that. I think it was about $200 million to be invested into all different types of sports, because they saw, obviously, with you know, the hype around everything, selling out stadiums, the successes of everything, they want to do that. But I still think it's a lot. You know, we've got a lot longer to go, because the A-League itself, for me, didn't capitalize on that World Cup enough.
No, we didn't.
No. And because of that, I think we've lost a lot of good players. Yeah. You know, we could have had the chance to bring players here. We were there. You know, you've got American and European players coming to play in the World Cup here, and they saw in their own eyes that people will come and watch our games.
Of course.
Okay. The A-League should have seen that and just capitalized on it instead of, you know, going out to Paramount and, you know, focusing there. Give us a reason to watch women's football. You know, give the clubs enough money to actually promote it properly. Get a marquee signing or two. That's kind of my biggest problem, is because, you know, yes, we got homegrown talent, but I wouldn't have heard it to bring over.
No, it's that's a good point, and I think the key thing was when you do bring a marquee player, it has to be a marquee player that really will has a name and will make an impact.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge to do that these days, because of the number of competing leagues and things that those players can still play in, and at the different level that those players can play at.
Like, I'll give you an example. I believe a player like Millie Bright, for example, is nearing towards the late stages of her 20s, nearing 30. That's not out of stretch. It's not out of share because a team like Chelsea, you got to look at teams like Chelsea who have stocks coming through at quality constantly, and it wouldn't have hurt the league for Sydney FC or Wanderers or Melbourne Victory
To at least be ambitious and
it's correct, and it would have done wonders because
that helps, but I think there's more to that issue than just bringing the player out. You have to tell it like a bigger story about that within, like you say, how clubs promote that, etc. So, I think that the concept behind it is good, but I think there has to be more meat on the bones and just sort of bring a player out and then hope that she brings a few more bodies through the gate.
No, it's true. I think we saw it this season on the men's side with Juan Mata and Douglas Costa, where they were able to actually promote the derby to the point where it sold out because it gave them a spectacle. Now, I believe in Australia, there's a lot of Arsenal women's fans. We saw it when they came down to Australia and Melbourne. They will go and they will go wherever this team follows. So I don't know. I think it's something they need to try. I think if you're going to give it to the men, give one a go with the women.
No, that certainly wouldn't do any harm.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk about the registration numbers in New South Wales post that. So it increased by 30% alone in the 2024 season. So a great start in achieving the campaign's ambitious goal of reaching a 50-50 split by 2027. Now, the other side to that, as we talked about before, SAP prices start from about $1,600. The youth league starts from about $2,500. Do you think that if we make these higher youth development levels a lot more affordable, do you think these numbers are more likely to reach 50-50? Because that's what they were trying to do with the Legacy 23 program. The Legacy 23 program, I'm sure you'd be familiar with it. It came out of the World Cup here in Australia. So that's one of their main goals, is to get to 50-50 split, 50% boys, 50% girls by 2027. So what do you think of those numbers? Do you think that the cost wanting to achieve that level is a problem? Or
well, I think I don't look at the cost as being a problem so much on that level. I just see the cost being a problem as in the amount the cost is. I just think it's extremely restrictive for families to pay $2,500 for their daughter or their son to play football. I don't have the answer. That's the problem. It's easy to spout that out, but I think it's it's way too expensive, and it eliminates a lot of people, a lot of blue collar families, which our game is about.
Yeah,
it's a working class game, always has been.
Yeah.
And that excludes a lot of people, particularly out in Western Sydney, a lot of ethnic groups where they just simply can't afford that amount of money for the kids to play football.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem. So I think the problem has to be addressed to say, how can we bring fees down, as opposed to how do we get, then we can start to say, how do we then get parity numbers wise with boys and girls. I think the key thing is, how can we get the fees down so kids can play football?
And you can't necessarily blame the middleman, which is the club at this point, because I call it like a big divorce. You've got the higher up that, they're not really doing much with it, and the clubs have to face the cost of everything. And that's, I get it, they're trying to run the club, but at the same time, I know too many footballers that are my age and older that should have been playing professionally, but couldn't because their parents couldn't afford to pay. If you total it up from SAP all the way to Youth League and MPL, the youth MPLs,
you're in double digits.
You're in $20,000 over the 12-year span that you're paying for a child to play football. That's ridiculous.
And again, it's one of those systems where very few amongst the world where the juniors feed the seniors.
Yeah,
it just doesn't work like that. And every successful model is the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And for me, it's not as simple as we knock the whole model down, because football collapses if that happens.
Yeah.
So if there's one thing, Tom, maybe you could suggest in terms of how do we get those costs down, even in a minimal way, just to allow those families? Is it a scholarship deal? Is it something along those lines?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of things you can do. Like clubs themselves could put themselves in a position where they offer scholarships to kids, so that kids are allowed to play. We could set up things where, like, this maybe not necessarily clubs as such, but kids can actually come out and just play football in certain setups.
It's a dying breed.
And I know that, for example, on a Wednesday night out at Wanderers Park, the field 5, I think, is given over to the Somalians to come out and play football, and a lad called Angok runs it, and he just, Angok, as you would. Fantastic. and you go out there on a Wednesday night, and there's adult men, there's young females, there's young lads, there's people just playing football. So I think it would be helpful just to even get situations where people can just actually go and play football. Yeah. That would be a first step for me.
Hey, look, some would say they're united by football.
Oh God. Tom, I'll give you a little bit of a. This man loves to throw in that line every single episode. Well done, Abs. That's your one-on-one every time. Moving to a more overseas context, and on that point as well, France, you will find that it doesn't cost more than €200 to register your player. And again, it's like we can't look overseas for these fixes, these models, these frameworks to bring it into Australian context, because it might not work here. Yeah. But if we were to bring it here, Tom, do you reckon that would be successful?
Oh, huge, yeah. But the thing, I think, again, in Europe is that the money flows sort of down from the top, whereas our football here, the money flows up from the bottom, and that's a hard thing to change. So we're probably more akin to America, the American system, than we are to the European system. How do we change? I wish I knew the answer to how we could change it. If clubs could get funded from other sources, that would help. Hopefully, and I believe it might happen at clubs, that the juniors pay to help the seniors, which is, I think, completely wrong. That I don't agree with. Yeah. But as I say, it would be nice to know ways to actually bring the cost down for kids to play.
Look, I think we're still early enough in terms of the success as a women's football to see that there's a much clearer route when it comes to girls wanting to become professional footballers. We see a lot more scholarship deals. We've seen it at FC and Wanderers recently. I know that the first few signings Wanderers had this season were all scholarship deals. Same with us. A lot of our girls that have come through the institute have come through the schools, through scholarships, get into the institute and into the FC side. Now, I think the men's is a whole different issue in itself. But when it comes to the women's side, do you think focusing on the quality of the player and the player, themselves, betters than, sorry, how do I explain it? Rather than the financial side will betterment, the country in terms of football, because I'm thinking that the more you focus on the financial side and getting the money out of them, you're going to lose that quality. You're going to turn a lot of people off the sport.
Yeah, well, that's an interest. So that brings up another point, is that back during my tenures before this one, is that we had the institute programs in place. We had NSWIS, we had the QAS, we had ACTAS, ACT, and we had full-time coaches and programs in those states for the elite players, and those players didn't pay to be in that system.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, some rocket scientists at the government decided around 2014 that that money could go to the sports rather than go into these specific programs. The result being that these programs have now collapsed. Yeah. So what would be helpful, and I'm talking about at the elite end and at top end, is that bringing those kind of programs back where your best players are actually in a program where they're getting the proper services, proper coaching, proper support services, but they're not actually paying anything. That's what helps, and that's where all the when you talk about the generation of players now that are reaching their 30s, that's the programs they all came through.
Yeah.
And those get shut down.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it explains everything, because you see a lot of these young, I think from the men's side of the game, a lot of the 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds that have come through now, there's a reason why the older generations say they're never going to reach the levels of your Messis and your Ronaldos, is because the Messis and the Ronaldos got that type of training, got that individual training, because they got seen for their talent rather than the money they put forward.
Completely different.
Whereas now, you pay in, everyone's getting the same training. And as we spoke about outside, it's all the exact same, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's just blanketed across the board.
Well, interestingly, so we've just started, we spoke earlier, before we come on air, about we've started our Girls Academy at the Wanderers, and that's fee-free. So the club has decided to make that investment in the women's game.
Yeah.
And so what would be helpful is, if we don't have the institutes now, is for A-League clubs in particular, and perhaps NPL clubs, to actually start to look at ways to make their academies fee-free. That way you're not compromising based on finance, and you're actually trying to bring the best players, and you can actually bring the best players, because if they can't afford it, they can still come and play in the program.
Like I've got a 12-year-old sister, and you want to putting her in her first 11-year-old sister. Sorry, putting her in her first season of football this year. You want to make sure she gets a fair chance. You want to make sure she gets a good opportunity. Like I could tell, she's grown up around three brothers, and we'll generally love our sport, and she's very much sporty in that sense. So you don't want to feel like you're having to pay $2,500 to get her to play to a certain level, where you've got opportunities like the Wanderers, where go in if you're talented, and even if you're not talented, we'll help you. Yeah. And that's what the football world needs at the moment, or at least in Australia, because there's not enough of it.
Completely agree. And just to move that quickly to a USA context before we go back to the Wanderers, their game over the last year, their attendance grew 32% from the year before that. They are averaging crowds over 10,000 plus game day. And is that due to the model of what we're saying, sort of off camera, where they've got that college sort of setup, where they've got that system, that feeder system, where they're actually playing for their livelihood?
Not so much in the crowd sense. I think the reason that has happened in the game is that there's suddenly been a huge influx of investment. Okay. So when I go back to my time at the NWSL, the women's teams were fairly underfunded at that time, but in the past to be fair, the European leagues, you only have to go back 4 or 5 years when they weren't great. So it's only really been the women's game in the last probably 4 years has just taken off out of sight that you would never believe. In fact, probably 6 years ago, Man United didn't have a women's team. So this has been where the women's game's at, has come around very, very quickly. So if you look at the American model, the NWSL, predominantly when I was there, you had a mix of clubs that were funded by MLS and some independent owners. Now they're mainly funded by independent owners or consortiums who are extremely wealthy and putting resources into the game. And that has resulted in increased marketing, it's resulted in increased crowds, better quality, better pay for players, etc. So that game, the US League has just gone from a position of being just jogging along, surviving, to really thriving.
Well, to put it into numbers, the average national or the NWSL franchise has gone up 57%. The average team is about $104 million US value. Angel City leader by pretty much 250 million. Like that's crazy to think that one team over there is probably worth more than this whole A-League that we've got here.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And that tells you, obviously there's individual owners that we talked about. I think most teams are standalone.
They are now.
Yeah. And they have no male counterpart, nothing like that. But I think it goes back to kind of the college, as we talked about, the college system that they have over there. You look at players like Sophia Smith, you look at players like, with Williams on the left, you grow up wanting to be like them. Even Rose Lavelle came played here a few years ago for the Wanderers, I believe, went back over there. It gives the 10, 11, 12-year-olds something to look up to, and there's a clear path. If you go through college, you do well there, you're more than likely going to be spotted.
Yeah, I think that's the difference between football in the US and probably football in any other country, is that you have a college system, and I think it's interesting. The big advantage of the college system was that at a dropout age for a lot of female players, you suddenly had 10,000 every year.
Wow.
Playing, because from that age of 17 to 21, when girls that played club football in other countries would just sort of drop out and get on with their life or whatever, by going to college they stayed in the game those years. The interesting thing is the game's become very quickly professional, is that the better younger players in America now are actually skipping college and going straight into the professional game. So, but the college dynamic has certainly helped the US, and particularly in the past, because it's just continued to give them big numbers playing.
100%, and they've got another team joining in about 2 years' time in Boston. So it cost them $53 million to get into the league.
So I think when I was at Orlando, I think when we came in, we were a franchise that came in, and I think we paid either $5 or $7.5 million.
Yeah. 7. Yeah, well, that's
compared to that is absolutely petty change. And on that thing as well, not being associated with UEFA at all, do you reckon that has helped, benefited the game at all in America in terms of their growth?
What do you mean by?
In terms of they're not associated with any European influences
with the USL.
With the USL, correct?
Yeah.
Has it helped? Well, they've always kind of been independent on their own, standalone anyway. So it's never. I think the thing that it has started to, it did start to impact the NWSL, which has changed the dynamic there, is when the European leagues, about 3 or 4 years ago, really started ramping up. It had a really negative impact on the professional league in America because virtually all the Australians, for example, moved to Europe because they were earning more money. Most of the Europeans moved back to Europe. So I think the two, the UEFA bit in America, they're two different and separate philosophies and separate ways of running businesses. But I think the NWSL has sort of bounced back and as I say, some very big investment by clubs in that, and that's certainly going to help the American game move forward.
Would you have liked to, obviously, when you were with Orlando Pride, would you have liked to maybe started that challenge now? If you could go back in your career, would you have liked to taken that now in 2016 or whereas now?
Yeah, probably. Well, probably now because in that stage in 2016, you're fighting a lot of battles that you're not fighting now. Because, like you say, most of the teams are standalone teams. They've got their own good stadiums. At Orlando, which was a great club, by the way, but you were still, the men's team still got on the best field. Yeah, the men's team still had, certain things that a women's team didn't have. Yeah. Now, with most of these standalone teams, or even the MLS teams now, there's parity in what they do. Yeah. So in that sense, the league is very much better. Interestingly, what it has done is the thing that the American League had because of salary cap and draft situations, there was a parity between the teams. Okay. So there wasn't a big gap between the team at the top and the team at the bottom. Now that dynamic has changed a bit, you're starting to see that you're starting to see bottom teams and top teams that are investing heavily, and you're starting to see a bit more of a European type league where the teams with the money and at the top are at the top, and the teams that are battling.
Clear distinction.
It's clear distinction. Yeah. So that's an interesting dynamic that's come into the NWSL.
Well, what do you think of the USL? Do you think that it could be a beneficial thing to the NWSL, or do you think it's more of a threatening thing that?
I don't think it's threatening because it's not going to be competing with it. So I think it's beneficial in the sense that it will allow a couple of things. It'll allow players who maybe weren't quite ready to go into the NWSL to have a league where it might help the development. So for late developers, for example, it gives them another opportunity to play professionally, albeit probably not earning a huge amount of money, but still to be a professional footballer. And then still get that opportunity that if they develop to go into the NWSL. Yeah. Whereas without the USL, if you didn't get into the NWSL after college, you were gone.
100%. My worry with the USL, and I've said it about our league here in Australia, is it's gonna basically start picking out the bets, pretty much the best of the bunch here. When it comes to, like I said, we lost Hannah Kane last year. We lost Vicky Bruce as well. All the Americans that were quality and came and brought that quality to the league are gonna find that option to go back home in the USL if they can't get into the NWSL.
That is, but the other thing that raises, it's a really good point, is that that our league needs to invest in that, because now the reality is money has jumped forward very quickly. Yeah. So there's now that competition. So it's not even just so much that the WSL started, it's the fact that there's now more leagues and there's more money in those leagues, so it becomes much harder to attract players to come here.
Yeah, and the problem is as well, when you start losing these players, player by player by player, especially with the conversation we had a few weeks ago with Falcon, they're averaging like $25,000 a year. That's nothing. And 60% of the league has to work second jobs.
You can't live. Yeah.
You can't Yeah.
Well, it's a 30. I mean, contracts at the moment are 35 weeks, so it is in essence still a part-time competition.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But they also want to treat it like it's a full-time professional. Yeah. Like you can't have both. You really can't. And I understand money and financial side of the A-League itself is a problem, but we can't expect one thing and have for example, we've seen the Matildas. They can sell out 80,000 seat stadiums. Yeah, our domestic league's suffering.
No, you're right, and that's where there needs to be greater investment in the domestic league. Now, where that comes from, it's interesting. Sorry, I'm going to go off here on a slight tangent. When I go into some corporate things, whether it be lunches or whatever, and the general support for women's football huge. Yeah, and then when they get the facts about what the girls earn and the corporates go, well, that's ridiculous. That's why they're only earning this, and this. So I say the three things that need to happen. Firstly, the corporates need to invest and give the sponsorship. That's the first thing that they need to do. Secondly, the media needs to give female sports, media coverage. When you go now during the World Cup, the Matildas were front and centre, front page, back page, etc. You look at a paper now. There's 9 pages of sports. There's maybe half a page of women's sports. Yeah. So that's it. And the third thing, people need to come along and support it. Right. Yeah. So it's okay for people to, pump the chest and say, no, this is terrible and the girls need to get X, Y, and Z and need to get more. But those things need to happen in conjunction with that. So, so the A-League women, they need a significant sponsor to come in at a few $1 million.
Completely agree.
Clubs need to get, $500,000, $1 million in sponsorship. So those things need to happen. We can't just turn around and say, well, they need to get more. So those people need to chip in as well. Yeah. If they're going to beat the chest and say women's sport needs to be supported, that's how it needs to be supported as well.
100%. And credit to the clubs that give them that limelight. The Wanderers give the women their own social media, their own marketing, their own promotion. Canberra United don't have a men's team. They promote the girls. Like Michelle Heyman's the face. You go to Canberra United. Michelle Heyman's the face of that club. Even with teams like Sydney FC, they try to give the girls. The girls don't play at Allianz. They play at Leichhardt. Their home is Leichhardt. They give them their own individual thing. And I completely agree with you. It's all talk. And get out and support the Tillies. I agree. But when it comes to supporting your local, get out, get behind the girls, give it a chance. Because we went to enough women's games last season. And mind you, like I said, I was someone that never really, I watched the women's football, but I never really got into it and got to go to games. I went to one game and I was genuinely I was in love with the game because it's a different environment.
It's a different product as well. That's what people,
it's a great environment, particularly to bring young females, young families and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, even taking my sister to games, when we went last season, I brought her along. It's an environment you want, your young sisters or, your aunties or your grandmas to be around because it's loving. It's cherishing. Like some people laugh, for example, when we were at the Tillies game where, they'll make a standard save or, a standard tackle or a clearance. The girls will clap them. It's different to the men's game where there's an expectation that it's, it's much higher. They make one mistake, they get booed, the referee this, it's just very much more volatile to men's game. Yeah. Whereas at a women's game, it's different. Get out, get to know it, show it some love.
I think on that point, Abs, what you're trying to say is that there is a clear distinction between the male game and the women's game. And I think people have to look at it from a different lens. And on that point, Tom, we'd like to just go back to context that you're very familiar now, obviously how we met, the West Sydney Wanderers. Do you want to quickly explain how you got into the role of head of women's football at the club?
Yeah, I made a mistake in saying yes one day when the chairman took me out for breakfast.
We took you out.
You don't say no to Mr. Lederer. I'd been chatting to the club and they'd been asking me to come along, and I think it's fair to say that they hadn't done the best with a women's program for many years. And so they genuinely want to make an effort to bolster the program and so I supposed to come in for 2 years. It's now over 2.5 years, and I'm still there. And it was to try and two main things. One was to to try and stabilise and improve the women's programme.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing was to start the academy. The club always wanted to have a women's academy that mirrored the men's academy. So those were the two mandates, if you like. Other than that, there was a title but no real job description. It was whatever you need to do, you need to do. So I think, you know, we've achieved some of, like anything, you know, we've achieved some of the things. There's some things that we still need to achieve. I think the club and the team's become more stable.
Yep.
We've actually, so when I came in 2 years ago in, I think maybe April or May, we had no players signed and we had no staff.
Wow.
And that was sort of typified, you know, the club would stop one season and then have a hiatus and then 10 weeks later start for the next season. So, you know, by the time we had finished this season, we had most of our staff in place. Sorry, last season, most of our staff in place for this season. And, you know, we had most of our players re-signed. So we're trying to get some, I think we've achieved a good degree of stability. And we've just started our academy, which we got the nod from Football New South Wales and had about 3 weeks to get trials and things organised and
400
sorted.
girls, you were saying, or something?
That was the Wonder Woman programme. we actually put an email out for our academy, and within a day get 900
That's
responses.
That's
crazy.
So that's how big the game is and how popular it is amongst the girls out in West Sydney.
That's incredible.
And we had trials, and we've now got a full academy of 100 and plus players, 6 teams, and they started training last week.
Kudos to yourself, kudos to the club, kudos to Jeff as well. Just quickly back onto your context, how did you find that transition from being a head coach, being an assistant coach before, to actually a TD or a head of a program? How did you find the transition?
Not too bad, because, you know, you're still doing a lot of the mechanics of the job that you did as part of your head coach. You know, your head coaching job, you're dealing with all those things anyway. So, you know, I think the big difference is that you becoming more of a supporting role to the head coach in the program. So it's a slightly different kind of, rather than being the hands-on decision maker, you're more the person behind the decision maker, supporting them. And then you also, you know, you get involved in different areas that you wouldn't necessarily have the time to get involved in if you were the head coach.
Yeah, and just on touching on Western Sydney itself, it's a melting pot when it comes to nationalities and backgrounds and cultures. And when it comes to football, people generally live for football. You know, it's their breakaway from life. You know, you finish, whether you're 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, you know, some people just want to finish work, go home, kick a ball. Now, what form it is, whether it's watching football, playing football, getting on the PlayStation and jumping on and playing FIFA, it doesn't matter what it is. How do you find that Western Sydney, in terms of the club, plays in that role?
Great. I was just going to say, like, the club deserve to be complimented on the relationship and the things that they try to do within that community in West Sydney. They are very, very conscious of the importance of being a club that's seen to help and look after the people of West Sydney, and that's part of the club mantra, is to do that. You know, and you see that when you see the African Cup out there, and you see the various teams that are playing in the five-a-sides every night of the week, and just the general sort of community that's out there, and the club have become very much part of that community.
I'll take it even a step further and say that, like, even from, you know, when I was younger, and I know some of my friends, their parents really didn't know too much about sport. They were too busy, especially in Western Sydney, focusing. They've got work, try to make a living.
Exactly.
The Wanderers do this so well in the sense of they'll head out to a school. And I know all clubs do it, but, you know, it's able to, you know, the little boy gets to know Brendan Brillo, or he meets, you know, Juan Mata or something like that. It gives them a sense of, okay, I like this club. You know, football means something to me, where they don't have to burden the parents with having to take them here, take them there. So I think the Wanderers bringing football to the fans, coming from an FC fan, do it very well.
No, they do. They do some stuff exceptionally well, and as I say, not only do they do that well, but they're also very conscious of how important that is to the club philosophy.
No, I agree, and
Completely.
it's kind of. I tried to support the Wanderers myself. Unfortunately, I apologise.
I did try, Tom. I tried. I bought him many dinners, drinks, and jerseys. Unfortunately,
Look, it's a good thing I didn't mention it to him when I first met him that I was an FC fan, or he probably wouldn't be sitting here today.
no. But on that sort of just a bit of sidetrack away from that, Tom. In our opinion, I think the women's game is a completely different sport to the male's game, as we alluded to before. In your opinion, do you think it requires a specialistic role or a trait or a talent or a management style to make you a specialist in the game rather than a person that floats from a male role to a female role and vice versa?
I think the management is different. Yeah, that's the key. That when you talk about male and female players, the actual football bit's all the same. The expectations, your demands, etc. The management bit is where it differs, and I'll quite often use the analogy of saying, if guys my age and younger, much younger, if you say, just think about your wife and think about things that impact. So, for instance, my wife will see things and pick up things that there might be simple things. She might say, "Oh, didn't you see that? Didn't you see that stain on the carpet?" And I was like, "What stain? What carpet?" So it's just it's a male female thing, and so within that, I think the management of female athletes can be slightly different to what it is with male athletes, because there's different stuff impacts them, and and it probably as the women's game gets much more professional, those differences are probably less and less now. But it's just there's some subtleties of management you need to be more aware of in a female team than you do in a male's team.
Like you think, from exactly what you just said about the wife noticing certain things, you think it's what you say and how you say certain things as well. And maybe coming from a male point of view, if you're in a room with say 20 to 30 women, you might say something that you would usually say in front of a group of men that you can't necessarily say in a certain tone, or you can't say certain things or approach in a certain way because of that. And I think I've had obviously yourself, you've coached women before, and then we've got I've got a friend of mine that coached the women's team too. He told me it's dealing with a whole different kettle of fish.
Absolutely.
It's just you not watch what you say, but it's kind of
the messaging has to be thought out.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Is that because generally your female player will actually listen to the message that you're given. Generally, your male player won't bother too much, and that's why, as I say, the communication and how you communicate is probably a little bit more critical in dealing with female athletes than it is with male athletes.
Well, on that, you've launched the national careers of a lot of players. I'm just going to name a list of names, whatever the say is.
It's a long list. Won't be here for an hour.
A long list of
just a few.
Caitlin Ford, Alana Kennedy, Steph Catley, Katrina Gorey, Tamika Yallop, Claire Pokinghorn, Hayley Russo, Emily Van Egmond, Mackenzie Arnold, and you handed Sam Kerr the Matildas debut at 15 years old. Now, what was your process in looking for certain qualities? Was it the precedent? Was it the person? Was it the skill? What do you look for first?
Good player.
Abs were never selected.
I don't think I'll ever make it.
It's a really good question. It's kind of looking at what you've got to remember. Like back in, although it wasn't that long ago, 15 years probably is long. The game was at a different place. There was more time to be able to do things. So you weren't under the scrutiny that you're under now. So you had time to actually look and give opportunities to those players. So the key thing is that you look, and it's like there's no textbook definition, but you try to look for what you think or who is going to be an international player and the qualities that they've got. And that's a combination. It's a combination of the physical abilities, their technical abilities, and then their ability to utilise those to perform on the field. So you're constantly looking, and I think in the national team, what you're doing is you're playing for the present, but you're constantly looking to try and make sure you keep developing for the future. And it's a little different than a club team, because the club team you can go out and buy players from here, there, and everywhere. The national team, you're restricted to people that can play for your country.
Yeah.
So that balancing that and keeping that, being able to keep that ticking over is a critical part of the job. And you're seeing now the gap with the national team, because it hasn't been done for a few years. And all of a sudden, those young players suddenly, in the blink of an eye, become old players.
Yeah.
And you start to say, well, where's the next generation? So one of the key things when you've got a national team is to try and balance where you've got the present, but you're also then preparing a little bit for the future. So that was the impetus for looking at those players. And we just happen to have, if you like, a golden generation of players coming through. And we had a great system.
Yeah.
8 full-time coaches out in the different cities, high-quality coaches. Alan Stajic, Robbie Hooker, Mike Mulvey, that's coaching the National League, Alistair Edwards, ex-international, and who could identify players. So we had a real combination of good players coming through, good system, and good coaches.
Can I pick your brain for a second?
Oh, so that's put a long take to pick my brain, yeah.
Run me through the process of what you were going through at the time selecting Sam Kerr at that age.
Just looking at them and seeing that. Well, there's a couple of things. The other thing that stood out, and we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, is that those players, the group that you mentioned, they all walked into the national team as if they had been there their whole life.
It's a rare quality.
They weren't intimidated by a Heather Gary or a Cheryl Salisbury, who can be quite intimidating. They just walked in and they just got on with it. So you saw certain things in their football and their physical qualities, but then you also saw certain things in their characters.
Yeah.
And the combination of them gave me the confidence to say, yeah, I'm quite happy to put you in there and play against Marta.
And what about Sammy stood out for you?
Just her dynamic physical qualities.
Yeah.
I mean, she could jump like a gazelle.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what, you look and you go, wow, look at that. Yeah. When she came in at 15, she wasn't the polished player that she is today.
No.
She was like most 15-year-olds. She was a little bit erratic, but she would do something that you go, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't see that. Kaya Simon was another one. Kaya coming in was enigmatic. At times, she would do stuff that would drive you insane. And then she would pull something out from nowhere. You think, where did she see that? Or how did she do that? And so that group of players, they all had the degree of those kind of qualities.
Yeah. No, it's just the names we've named there, and you think about Sam Kerr and you think about Kai Simon. They're in their 30s now.
Yeah, I know, it's scary.
It's
Kai Simon, obviously, for senior C as well.
Yeah, and Sam Kerr, I thought, you don't think she's been around for as long as she has.
I know.
It's crazy to think about it.
The classic, I'll tell you, Kaya Simon. So when we won the Asian Cup, back in those days, all the games were played in the same field. So by the time we got to the final, it was a miserable, horrible, wet, damp night in China, and the mist was kind of coming down on the field, and Kaya came on as a sub, without boots, without any studs, and she basically slipped and slid and was on her backside probably more than she was on her feet in the half hour that she was in the game. She, as usual, she did some really good things, and then the next minute she'd be falling on her backside. It came to the penalty shootout. It was 4-each. They had missed a penalty. And Kaya was taking a final penalty. So this is, I don't know what age she was in, 18 maybe. She walked up, put the ball down in this muddy pitch, which was like an English winter's pitch from the 70s and 80s. She put the ball down, took 2 steps back, turned round, and Hooks and I were on the bench, and we said, well, this is either going in the top corner or in row 20. We didn't know what was going. And she took 2 steps, walked back, and just walked up and put it in the top corner, as if she was taking a penalty with her mates in the park.
Oh wow!
Wow.
And that's when you ask me what are those qualities, that's some of those qualities that you say, I'll put her on the pitch any day against any player in any team.
It's cool, calm and collected. And another thing we'll talk about before, it's like, in front of our eyes, we're seeing certain players grow. And I was telling you off camera, I'm like, I think Katrina Glory for me is the big one.
Yeah.
You know, she was very much that shy, quiet player, and she's playing for Brisbane Roar at the time. Moves to West Ham, she's a captain within a season. As you say, there's certain moments on the field that make you realise how players grow, and it's moments like that. But
completely. And just moving away quickly from the Australia context into a sort of UK context, obviously being Scottish yourself and born there, raised there, played there as well. What's the big difference compared to the Scottish game, the overall UK game compared to the Australia game?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, culturally, they've had a lot of years to play and have the kind of game and style of game that they play and what the supporters want and how they want their team to play, etc., etc. I think Australia, to be fair, I think Australia in many ways has been very fortunate because they've had a real mix of influences. When you go back into the old National League, and when you go back into that golden generation of players that came through, like Viduka, Ned Zellick, Ocon, all those real, almost world class players that came through. They all came through, either a Croatian setup or an Italian type setup or a British type setup, whatever. So there's a real mix of things in Australia, and I think that was a great advantage to the Australian system, and that's kind of died a little bit because those generations are now second generations, whereas back in those early NSL days, in those days, the people come from Yugoslavia it was then, or Italy, or Britain or whatever. And they sort of brought that football with them. And those kids are then brought up with that football. The second generation, maybe not so much. So we've had less of that influence. So I think that's the difference. I think there's been lots of different influences in the Australian game. And I think, as I say, that was a real positive for Australian development at that time.
So do you reckon on that point, do you reckon the worst thing, or one of the worst things that we did was try to maybe not eradicate, but show our discontent with ethnic groups or the ethnic influence on the Australia game? We wanted to build that Australian identity.
I think we did the ethnics a grave injustice when we started the A-League. I think, in fairness, the NSL had run its race. I think the unfortunate thing, the NSL clubs, and this is a very general statement, they had the passion was football. The reality is the game get more professional. The organisational capacities of the clubs were not good enough to then take the game further, and that's when the NSL basically became bankrupt in the early 2000s. So I think the move to the A-League was a necessary move and a good move. What I think we did poorly is we basically eradicated all ethnic parts of our game, and that was a huge injustice and a huge mistake, because the ethnic clubs were the lifeblood of football and still had and have a big contribution to make to the game.
I know.
Very well said. Can I add as well? I'm getting chills, to be honest, a bit, because I'm coming from a Croatian background. When I was younger, I used to go to Sydney United, Sydney, Croatia, Sydney 58 back in the day, how many times they've changed their names. But no, that's very well said. Seriously, I'm getting goosebumps as we speak, because that was very well said.
Croatians love the football. My first real coaching gig was Canberra, Croatia, player coach, and we had a fabulous team in Canberra, local Canberra lads and several Croatian lads in that team. Ned Zellick obviously being one of them, Josip Simonic, Ante Juric, Tony Lemazina, players that went on and did really well. And their passion for football and good football was just fantastic. They appreciated the game.
Made your job a little easier because you can't teach passion.
No, yeah, and they knew the difference between good football and bad football.
Can I say I agree with you? Because you look at Ante Juric at Sydney FC, the football he plays with that team, especially last season, it was at times breathtaking.
It's not as good as the Wanderers.
Oh, look.
You walked yourself into that one, mate. Seriously, like you knew what Tom was going to say.
I'm trying to.
He knew.
I'm always
I
out.
like to keep you on your toes.
I'm always outnumbered when it comes to the Western Sydney Wanderers.
Not in
unfortunately,
physical stature, as you used to say.
So, mate, 6'6" doesn't. With Ante Juric, you said it perfectly. You look at the way he redefined the way we played football last year. We didn't have a left back for most of the season. What did he do? He stuck a left winger back there, moved it onto, like, he was just shifting plays around like he was. He looked at it. I'm like, okay, they're footballers. They're quality footballers.
Quality coach as well.
Let me play quality football. Yeah. Abby Lemon, who's a left winger naturally, was playing at left back for most of the season. And I'm just like, I don't know how he's going to do this, but if he figures this out, figures this out. Margot Chauvet started as a fullback, ended up playing in DM. The way he just played around with that team was just amazing, and it's credit to that. And it's that I'm Lebanese. Like, unfortunately, we don't necessarily have a team here in Sydney, but the Wanderers, I'll say this, even as an FC fan, give me that sense of relatability.
Yeah, of course.
And that's what we yearn for here in Australia as football fans, relatability. It's all good and well having the Harbour Bridge and Opera House on your logo, or having, the Wanderers, or, Melbourne Victory with their little, 2 Vs there. But what does that mean? What does that actually mean? And I was going to say the next question, yourself, you're born in Scotland, and as we could tell by the beautiful Scottish accent that you possess. But dare I say, when you managing the Australian team, it makes no difference. You know what it's like to be Australian, and how important is that message to get across to the girls, to tell them that it's not just about putting the ball in the back of the net. It's not about, having the fans cheer for you. It's about the 26.5 million people that live in this country that you're playing for. What is that, and how important is that message to get across?
Oh, it's vitally important, and I think what's helpful in that message is that the couple of generations that have led up to this generation that are playing have kind of instilled that never say die Matildas kind of attitude in the team, and the senior players now are the ones that are responsible for sort of taking hold of that mantle and passing it along to the next generation, and it's vitally important, So it's not just your national team; it's the Matildas, and how you represent the Matildas on the field, but also off the field. Yeah, for me is of critical importance.
Yeah, on that point correctly. And if you could build a five-a-side, bit of a side trick, if you build a five-a-side team of players that you've coached, doesn't have to be just Matildas, but players that you've coached in general, who would be in that team? We'll go goalkeeper. Two defenders.
And however you want to build the rest.
Yeah. Oh, so you've thrown that one straight at me, haven't you?
Without no script, ladies and gentlemen.
well, there would be there would be Marta and Cici from Brazil would be in it straight away.
Got to have a goalkeeper, by the way.
Yeah. But so I'm looking. I wouldn't look past Lydia, to be honest. I would stick Lydia in goal. You've got me thinking. See, was that in the script? Was that no?
Matthew, well done. Great question.
It actually was.
Oh, it was in the script.
It's on the back there.
I should have read it. You would have to put Sam Kerr in there, obviously, because she's going to score the goals for you. One more. I've got one more player. I haven't picked a defender in any of this, so I suppose I'll have to come up with I would stick Cheryl Salisbury, my defender.
Salisbury, yeah,
absolutely. It was interesting that Cheryl get picked, and when you go back to say a 2005, 2005 onwards a bit even, Matilda, you still were. You still weren't rated in women's football in the world, really. And interesting. So after the 2007 World Cup, Cheryl Salisbury got picked. Sorry, I'd have Lisa Devana in my team as well. Forgot about Devana. I bring Lisa off the bench. She's quite happy coming off the bench. She's happy coming off the bench.
I've got one that you may have left out, Alex Morgan.
not as good a player as those others.
No?
Great goal scorer,
Yeah, well.
but not as good as player.
You'd put Sammy above
Yeah.
Alex
You
Moore.
would have to.
Absolutely.
You would have to.
Yeah.
Don't tell Alex that.
Hello, Alex.
She's still a fantastic player, but yeah. So Cheryl got picked in a World 11, and Hope Powell, the English coach, was sort of taking it and speaking to Hope afterwards. And the first thing she said, I just never realised how good a player Cheryl was. And like Cheryl was a real top class player, but he's tall and status and stature, but like she was Aussie, so people just thought she was a big, strong Aussie centre back. They didn't realise how good a player she was.
But on that point, Tom, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
So with all the eyes and the television and everything now, and obviously the money in the game, if Cheryl was playing now, easily.
Absolutely. No
Wow.
danger. Yeah. And it was just interesting that and you could almost, like when you went to a tournament like a World Cup, you could almost write the technical report on the Australians, competitive, hard working, and you're like, hold on, we just had Lisa Devana, the top scorer in the tournament. And it was really hard to get the players to get the credit that they actually deserved. And it was an interesting dynamic. Used to frustrate the living daylights out of me, particularly when you beat somebody. I remember we beat England leading into the 2011 World Cup 2-0. Lisa just tore them apart, and we really beat them. But at the end of the game, it was almost like, well done.
You're quick, you're strong.
Right,
that's it.
you don't.
Well, on that, we asked our viewers, we're going to pick one question. We've got the current interim, hopefully the permanent Matildas coach. So which ex-Matilda would you slot straight into today's 11?
Good question, actually.
We'll make it easy. They're retired.
Retired. Yeah. I'm thinking because it's hard just to pick. It's hard to pick one. I tell you who I'd put in. There's a girl. There's Colette McCallum. Played for us. She's dad's Scottish. She's
Maybe that's what.
Colette McCallum, 2007. The German national coach said she was the best midfield player in the world.
Oh wow!
Well,
She was left-footed passer, midfield vision. She was like a female Pirlo or female Glenn Hoddle kind of player.
Wow!
Great vision.
Yeah.
Great passing. Had bad knees, unfortunately that put her out of the game.
Yeah.
But her ability to see the picture, so the thing that stands out when people talk about great players, and you often don't appreciate it, so you actually go and watch them play live. And the thing that you see from the stand, and I don't know how it works, but you see it from the stand, that you see that great player has already seen the picture. Before the ball comes to them.
Yep.
I've never quite worked it out how, but
It's a rare phenomenon.
But you're like, when that's going to come to him, that they've seen that pass or they've seen that pass or they've, and Colette was one of those players. And the biggest challenge that I had with her in the early days was getting the other players on the same page.
Yeah.
So instead of waiting until Colette sort of controlled the ball and set up to actually make you run as soon as it's coming to her,
because she'll find you.
She'll find you and see the picture. And she was just and technically just an outstanding player.
I'll say I know exactly what you mean. I think last season I clocked that with one player, Mackenzie Hawkesby. She's one of those players in midfield where she just, like you said, she knows what she's doing 2 passes before she gets it, and it's just something about it. Unless you understand football, you're not really going to appreciate that side of it.
On that point, in the current Matilda squad, who do you think, when they end up retiring, who do you think will most likely be a manager? Who do you think's got it?
Well, you know what? It's you can't. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why you can't predict that. And I've got it, and hopefully he'll still talk to me after. So, Ante Milicic, who's turned into an excellent manager.
Yes.
So Ante was in when I coached in the boys program at the AIS. Ante was one of our athletes. And in fairness, he was only 17 and 18 then. So if you asked me then to say which one of your athletes wouldn't have been a manager. He was top of the list. And he's done. So that's why I'm saying.
Until we apologise.
But like to answer that, which player do I think would be a manager? You probably look at players like
Alana Kennedy.
Like maybe a Gorey.
Yeah.
What was the one you mentioned?
Alana Kennedy.
Alana could possibly be a manager. I'm not sure if she would. Not patience isn't the right word. I'm not sure if she would have.
She's very nice.
She's nice. Yeah, really nice.
Yeah. I'd always try to say she's very friendly. She's too nice to.
Claire Hunt could.
Yes.
But she would be no prisoners. You wouldn't. There'd be no messing about with Claire. It'd be like, whoosh. And those would be the ones, kind of, off the top of my head. I think. Mate.
Call me crazy, Ellie Carpenter.
I don't know. I think she could, because in fairness, her when we're in team meetings, she brings up and on the field, she actually does bring up some really good points and asks some really good questions.
Yeah,
I think she's one of those leaders without the armband.
Yeah,
personally for me.
Well, she gets the armband.
Correct, of course. Yeah.
I think Katrina Gore. I think Minnie's for me the front runner. I could just see her. You know, with the long, she's only about 5 foot, but with the full.
I was going to say, with short people in the room, stature does not matter, mate. On that point, Abs, if you want to take us through those next fixtures that obviously Tom will be seeing over.
So the Tillies play Brazil on the 28th of November and the 1st of December in Queensland. Yeah. And then you play the Chinese Taipei women's team on the 4th and the 7th of December in Victoria. How are you feeling about them? What are you looking forward to the most, or what should we expect?
I'm looking forward to all on two very different games. The Brazil team at the moment, very strong, very aggressive, very front foot, as well as being talented. So that's going to be a real challenge.
Yeah.
Chinese Taipei, a slightly different challenge. They'll probably come and park the bus. You're going to have the patience and the skill sets to break them down. So, yeah, two very, very different games.
I think two very different approaches as well is what I'm sensing.
Yeah, no, very much so.
Yeah. Well,
no, in just terms of that, from obviously as a not as experienced coach as obviously Tom and the other guests that we've had on the thing, would that be a sense of trying to break down a low block against the Chinese Taipei, maybe take the game to them, and with Brazil it's more of that maybe like a defensive approach with a 5-3-2 in play, or that's
I think you kind of already know what your tactics are going to be against Chinese Taipei, because they're going to play the low block. Correct. And if you don't, you're just going to go out and play because of hopefully they don't play a low block. That would be a big advantage to us. So you then, in general, are just going to go out and play your own game. Against Brazil, you've got to be much more tactically aware on how they're going to play, as well as trying to sort of play our own game. So we're going to have to, a bit like Germany, they'll play a bit like Germany and be very, very aggressive, close down high in the field, up the field. So we have to be much more cautious in how we play out. We have to look at certain ways to try and play out to beat their pressure, to be sort of successful against them.
That's it.
Well, Tom's got a bit of a gift. So thanks to the Corner Post.
Yes.
They knew you were coming on the show, and Julie is of Scottish descent. So she knew Tom's coming on the show. We've got to give him something.
Yeah, absolutely. Thomas. So, yeah, likewise with the Corner Post, they've just given Tom, if you want to go inside that bag quickly.
Thank you. Oh, well, look at this.
Show up what they've decided to.
I would like to say thank you very, very much. I never talk. It's the most valuable strip in the world. Thank you very, very much to the Corner Post.
Correct, yes.
Fantastic shop.
Yeah,
and obviously they still fantastic merchandise.
No, absolutely, Tom. And like we said with the Corner Post Lightweight Athletic Club as well. But no, Julie, thank you so much for coming on board. And from a Scottish hand to a fellow Scottish hand, it's been an absolute pleasure. And Tom, thank you so much, honestly, from the bottom of our hearts, from us men at West Sydney Wanderers, and obviously with the UBF family. It's just an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. It's been a great night.
No, we appreciate it. Honestly, we could just sit here and listen to some of the stories and just pick your brain. It's just, the experience that you've had over the 20 years in women's football and the 30 years before that, as the 30s. Before that, you're not that old.
Careful,
30 years.
I'm getting there. Trust me, I'm getting
Only
there.
got 2 minutes left of the podcast. Just careful.
No, the vast experience you've got over your career is just, sometimes when they say, when it comes to someone with experience, you just need to sit there and listen and understand. Today's just been that. And it's been a pleasure to have you on. And I honestly, probably, sorry to everyone else that's been on the show, has to be my favourite episode so far.
Right, thank you. Is it the first episode? No.
Fair play.
And that pill you were telling me to look for, I'm going to have to go look for it after.
No. Once
Thank
again,
you.
thank you, Tom. It's been a pleasure. And we have been United by Football. I've been Thomas.
I've been Abs.
And joined by special guest today.
Tom Sermanni.
Hey.
Ciao. Thank you so much. Beautiful. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, guys.
Now, that's from them.